Hey everyone, this is Jonathan from Guitar Player Academy, and today we're going over a slightly different thing than a song. We're actually going to break down how to solo. I know for me, some of my legends that really inspired me were like John Mayer, Neil Schon from Journey, George Benson, and many other greats, Stevie Ray Vaughan. The list goes on and on and on. And as soon as I picked up the guitar and kind of learned my first 10 to 15 songs, I instantly wanted to play like them. And I quickly found out that the fretboard, instead of being a map, is much more of like a maze if you're just starting out. So I want to create a map for that maze for you all, so then we can kind of make our way throughout the fretboard and learn to solo like some of the greats. Now, obviously, we can't solo like John Mayer just by picking up the guitar, so we're going to start super fundamental, super basic, and we're going to work our way all the way up through some complex harmony. But for part one, we're really only going to stay on one chord, and that's G. G is a chord you see in every single pop song, pretty much. A lot of the pop songs that we've gone over here on Guitar Player Academy's YouTube channel pretty much always have some type of G in there somewhere. So let's break down what notes we can and cannot play on this chord. There are three notes that you will always be able to land on. Three notes. You have G, obviously that's called the root. B, which is a major third. It's the third degree, because if you think of a keyboard, right, or if you think of your guitar, G, A, what's next? B. Let's keep walking up here, and our fifth will be D. Right? Let's not talk about C yet. We're going to get there a little later. However, the number three, the top three that you want to focus on is G, B, D, G, B, D, G. And I'm kind of in this G bar chord shape on the 3rd fret. E string, that's our G note. Right? So I'm going to play a loop here, and I'm going to demonstrate some things you can do, and you'll see that while it all sounds great, it kind of leaves something lacking. Like, okay, it all worked, but it was boring. It was boring. And, it worked and it was okay, but it didn't tell a story. The number one thing you want to keep in mind, it's something that I've studied with a lot of different teachers in a lot of different backgrounds, and it doesn't matter if it was jazz, if it was funk, if it was rock, if it was country music, it didn't matter. The number one advice that I received from everyone about soloing was tell a story. And if you think of your favorite book, if it was the 51st pages had no conflict and it was just life is sunny, everything's good, you'd probably stop reading after page 25. You wouldn't want to keep listening. And that's what happens to our listeners when they hear a solo, if you're just sticking to that. There's something in music, and it also pertains to reading, called tension and release. Right? The three notes that we started out with, G, B, D, and then obviously G up the octave, those are our releases. But there is such thing as having tension in music, right? If our second finger here is on the 3rd fret E string on our G, there are other notes that aren't stable to land on, but great to play over, right? So we'll break down the fingerings here. We have G, 2nd finger on the E string. A, this is the 2nd degree of the scale. I'm playing it with my pinky. We have our familiar B with my index finger on the 2nd fret. Our familiar D, which is on the 2nd fret, the 5th fret of the A string. And then you have a note that we haven't played yet before, which is the 6th degree, which is an E, and then we resolve the G. With the addition of these two notes, we've created the major pentatonic scale. The major pentatonic scale does not include the rest of the notes of the major scale. The major scale in total has 7 notes. We're not going to get to those 7 in this video just yet. However, I want to point out, it's a really easy way to remember, penta means 5. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then obviously your octave, right? And there's ways to approach these notes that create a tension and release. For example, if I'm starting out with my looper here, if I'm sitting on the 3rd to the 5th, that's the 6th degree, that's E. Really uncomfortable. 6 wants to go back to 5. That's tension, release. Again, 3, 5, 6 to 5. It's almost, to me, it has almost always felt like you're holding your breath, you know? It's like speaking a sentence. Everything's good. And it's like almost everything inside of me as a player kind of like leans forward, like, okay. Like we get it. Oh, okay. Deep breath. We made it, right? The 2nd here, which, by the way, we're going to get more into chord theory, can either be referred to as the 2nd or the 9. But again, we're in major pentatonic, so we're going to refer to it as the 2nd here. Wants to go always back down to 1, right? We'll play it again here. So we'll start the same line the same way. It's like, all right, you know, tension, release. Now, these rules here of tension and release doesn't mean you exactly have to release the tension right away. It's a technique, right? It's kind of like art. You know, it's one of those things where if you're playing your instrument and you really want the audience to kind of be on the edges of their seats, a lot of the greats, they won't exactly resolve right away. They'll kind of float around it. Also, I want to make a point. There is such a thing with the 2nd degree here, where I'm sliding up to the B. That's just our 3rd degree. So 2nd, more times than not, will go down to 1. However, sometimes what I like to do is I like to kind of build and build and build and build and not have it go to 1 right away. For example, right? There was a little bit of tension there, but there was a lot of release, which was good. It has to be a balance. You can't just play tension, 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 and then move on to your next idea. A lot of it has to do with tension, 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 release. Tension, 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 release. It's almost like having a conversation and you're talking to someone that kind of dominates the conversation, dominates the floor, and you have comments that you want to say about what they're saying, and they're going da 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 da, and then about 2 minutes in, you want to interject with something, but then they keep going, and you kind of get that like annoyance, and you're like, oh no, like I'm almost disinterested at this point. Music, and especially solos, can be a lot like that. You do not want to frustrate your audience to the point of like, well, I'm disinterested, right? Also, there's something called the blues note on this, right? Where if we're going over our 5 notes that we've talked about, you can add what's called the flat third, right? So if we have 1, 2, major third. I'm also going to demonstrate it like this. 1, 2, major third. You notice that I skip this B flat here. That's called a minor third, a flat third, because you're taking the third and you're flatting it down a half step. So in our case, in the key of G, you're playing a flat third, a B flat. Now, this is not a note. You know how we were talking about B is a great note to land on in the key of G? That's true. B flat is not. B flat is not. If you're playing your G chord here, you have G, B, and D. If you were to have this note and that note playing at the same time here, it's not pretty. It's not pretty. It's a half step tension. It's not good, right? However, we can utilize that, because it's outside of the key, to add just a little bit of flavor to our major pentatonic scale, which, by the way, with the addition of this flat third, helps create what's called the blues scale, the major blues scale, right? The blues scale is probably the most famous scale that you'll hear, especially for me, growing up in the jazz scene of like middle school jazz band, high school jazz band, college jazz band. The blues scale was like the #1 buzzword. Right? Again, that's, you can either half step, slide up to your third, 5, 6, 1. Where I like to use it the most, honestly, is this upper register. It's so much easier than, yeah, okay, it works, but, and again, this is just a B flat to a B natural. Notice I am never landing on, if I'm doing a line like, no, I'm never landing on the B flat. I can, okay, it's a passing tone. They say that term a lot. It's called a passing tone. Why? Because you're just passing by to get to home base, which in this case would be B, right? So to demonstrate that, here's just our regular major pentatonic again. With a flat third. Right? And you notice it's okay. You don't always have to pass up to your major third. You always can. That's a great option. But I like to, remember that tension and release we were talking about? Tension, tension, release. Right? But I always landed on either G, D, or B. Always, no matter whatever you're doing, you always want to land on what we call G, B, and D as chord tones. Those are chord tones, right? Kind of the last step that we're going to take this for this part. There will be a part 2, but just for this section is bending, right? So if we keep in mind all the notes that we've covered today, there's 6 in total. We have chord tone, the 2nd degree, which is tension, flat 3, which is more tension, 3, 5, 6, and then obviously to resolve it, right? But you don't have to kind of fret every single one of those notes. If I want to get, if I'm playing a line like this, I'll take the exact, that line right there, right? What I can also do is and all I'm doing is, instead of fretting it up a half step, I'm just bending. If I'm playing a line like this, right? All that was I took the flat 3rd and bent it up a half step and then resolved it with 1. You have to be careful with these bends though. Bends can kind of be a trap, where if I bend too far up, now you're totally out, right? So you kind of have to measure it out almost. So what I did starting out is I would play, and I'd get those pitches in my head, and I'd go and memorize the distance that my string would have to travel upward in order to really play that note accurately. Again, it can be kind of a hazard if you don't use it appropriately. Also, you don't want to overbend a lot of things. And by overbend, I don't mean overbend in pitch, but use bends way too often. Bending is a tool in the toolbox, not the entire toolbox. And I say that because when I figured out how to bend, I bent everything. I bent everything from start to finish. So you want to use it tastefully and flavorfully. Also, with your soloing, it doesn't matter if you're playing G, B, D, if you're playing a major pentatonic, if you're playing a blues scale, does that matter? The second most consistent piece of advice I got from all of my teachers was space. You'll notice that when I'm playing these solos, I'm not doing this, essentially. I'm not going nuts. I'm not going nuts. I'm putting space, right? Space is very important. So if I'm right? Several different note durations. There's points where I'm not even playing at all. I physically actually take my hand off the guitar. Stuff like that is what makes music. Again, it will go back to the conversation analogy here. If you have somebody rambling on and just saying words just to say words, it doesn't mean a whole lot, right? I was told a great saying, and I can't remember who told it to me honestly, but they said each note, treat it like it's worth $100,000 and all you have is $1 million. And I say all I have is $1 million because you have 10 notes to spend, if you will. Spend them wisely. And to me, I was like, wow. I was like, that puts it into perspective, right? You want to make sure that each note is worth you know, something. It's not just, you know, like, all right, that's great. That's kind of impressive, but did I say anything? No, I said nothing. Opposed to, there's so much more said in that than just, you can use speed to your advantage, you can use a lot of notes to your advantage, but again, if you have a general toolbox here of all the things that we're going to learn about soloing, space is just as important as notes, right? So quick summary of everything that we've kind of learned here. We have our chord tones, which is the first, the third, and the fifth of every single chord, right? So in this case, we're in key of G major. So we have G, B, D, G, B, D, G, right? After that, we then built out the major pentatonic by adding the second and the sixth degree of the scale. So G, A, B, D, E, obviously resolve, right? And then on top of that, we added a chromatic note, or otherwise known as a passing tone, to create the blues scale, which is the flat third. Finally, we talked about bending. Again, it's great to bend that second degree up to flat third. It's great to bend that flat three to natural three, but you don't want to overdo it, right? There are other tensions that you can bend to. You know, one that I did a lot, and we're going to dive more into this. In part 2, we have the flat 7, and then, which is like a sharp 4, almost flat 5. Don't worry about those. We're going to talk more about that as the series continues. But again, that's your money stuff. And that's pretty much it. That's part 1 of kind of this series I'm creating of the fundamentals of how to solo. If you guys have any questions and or want to ask any questions, not only pertaining to this video, but stuff you'd like me to cover in the future, you know, certain scales, certain degrees, I will make sure to check out the comments and then bring those into future lessons. Again, this is Jonathan from Guitar Player Academy, and keep coming back and keep shedding, because we want to make you the best guitar player that you can be. I hope to see you in part 2, where we keep building on these fundamentals. See you there.